The big TV studio buzzed with activity on that Thursday evening. People ran around with papers, coffee cups, and headsets. The famous American Icons show was about to film its most important episode ever. Everyone felt nervous and excited at the same time. The studio looked amazing. Bright lights hung from the ceiling. 3 comfortable chairs sat in the middle of the stage. 2 chairs were for the special guests, and 1 was for Diane Kelly, the host with the perfect smile and kind blue eyes. Behind the chairs, a large screen showed pictures of famous American movies. The audience seats filled up quickly with people who had waited months for tickets. Diane paced back and forth near her chair. She checked her note cards again and again. This was not just any regular show. Tonight she would interview Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro together. These 2 men were among the most famous actors in American history. They had made so many great movies that people had lost count. They had won awards, made millions of dollars, and shaped how Americans thought about movies. But there was a problem. These 2 men did not like each other very much. They had never worked together in a movie. They had different ideas about politics. They had different ways of acting. And now, they would sit together for a whole hour on live TV. 5 minutes. "Everyone!" called out Joe, the floor manager. He was a short man with glasses who had worked at the studio for 20 years. "Guests are in final makeup." Backstage in separate rooms, the 2 actors got ready. In the first room, Robert De Niro sat still while Lisa, the makeup artist, powdered his face. De Niro wore an expensive dark blue suit with a red tie. His gray hair was perfectly cut and styled. He looked like a powerful businessman, or maybe a senator. "Mr. De Niro, is there anything else you need?" asked Lisa as she finished her work. "No, thank you," De Niro said. But his mind was elsewhere. He thought about all the things he wanted to say on the show. He had strong feelings about politics. He did not like people who supported certain political ideas. And he knew that Clint Eastwood had very different views than his. De Niro tapped his foot on the floor. He was ready for this conversation. He had practiced what he would say. In another room down the hall, Clint Eastwood sat quietly while Steve worked on his makeup. Unlike De Niro, Eastwood wore simple clothes, brown pants and a light blue button-up shirt, no tie. His face showed his age with deep lines that told stories of his long life in movies. "Almost done, Mr. Eastwood," said Steve. Eastwood just nodded. He didn't talk much. Everyone knew this about him. On movie sets and interviews at awards shows, Clint Eastwood always used few words. Some people thought he was rude. Others thought he was shy. But the truth was simpler. He believed that people talked too much and listened too little. Steve had tried to cover up some of the lines on Eastwood's face, but the actor had stopped him. "Leave them," he had said. "I earned every one of them." Outside these rooms, the show's producer, Gail Watson, worried. She was a tall woman with red hair who had worked in TV for 30 years. She knew when a show would be good. She also knew when a show might turn into a disaster. "This could go very wrong," she said to her assistant, Peter Brown. "De Niro has been making comments all day. He seems ready for a fight." "What about Eastwood?" asked Peter. "That's the problem. I can't read him. He barely said 10 words since he arrived." Peter looked at his clipboard. "Should we change anything? Maybe give Diane some emergency questions if things get too heated?" Gail shook her head. "No. People want to see these 2 giants together. If there's tension, that's good TV. Just make sure the censors are ready with the delay button." At that moment, the door to De Niro's room opened. The actor walked out, looking confident. He nodded at Gail and Peter as he passed them. "Ready for a good show?" asked Gail. "It'll be memorable," De Niro said with a small smile. Then he walked toward the stage. A minute later, Eastwood's door opened. The tall, lean actor stepped out. Even at his age, he moved with purpose. His eyes, sharp and clear, looked straight. "Ahead?" "All set, Mr. Eastwood?" asked Peter. Eastwood just nodded and followed the path De Niro had taken. Gail whispered to Peter, "Here we go." On stage, Diane Kelly welcomed the studio audience. "Good evening, America. Tonight is very special. For the first time ever, two legends of American cinema will share the stage. They have inspired us, entertained us, and made us think about what it means to be American. The audience clapped loudly. Cameras moved around to catch different angles of the stage. Please welcome Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro. The audience stood up. They clapped and cheered as the two men walked onto the stage from opposite sides. De Niro waved and smiled. Eastwood gave a simple nod to the crowd. The two actors met in the middle of the stage. They shook hands briefly. People who watched closely could see that De Niro held on a bit longer than necessary, looking directly into Eastwood's eyes as if sending a message. Eastwood's face showed nothing. They sat down in their chairs. De Niro crossed his legs and adjusted his suit jacket. Eastwood sat straight, his hands resting on the chair arms. "Gentlemen, thank you for being here," Diane said. "This is truly a historic moment." "Happy to be here," De Niro said smoothly. "It's not often we get to have these conversations." Eastwood simply nodded. In the control room, Gail watched the monitors. "Camera 2, get a close-up of Eastwood," she said into her headset. "I want to see his reaction to everything De Niro says." Diane started with easy questions. She asked about their first movies. She asked about directors they had worked with. De Niro gave long, detailed answers. He told stories about famous movie sets. He talked about his method of becoming his characters. When Eastwood's turn came, his answers were short but thoughtful. He didn't talk about his feelings. He talked about the work, about showing up on time, about respecting the crew, about telling the story simply. After 15 minutes, something changed. De Niro started to bring up current events. He mentioned policies he didn't agree with. He talked about responsibility in public life. "As artists," De Niro said, leaning forward in his chair, "we have a duty to speak up when we see things going wrong in our country. Some people stay silent because it might hurt their career. I've never worried about that." Diane tried to bring the conversation back to movies, but De Niro continued. The audience became very quiet. They could feel something building. Eastwood watched De Niro. His face remained calm. If he felt angry or upset, no one could tell. In the front row, a woman named Susan Jones whispered to her husband, "This is getting uncomfortable." Her husband, Bill, whispered back, "Eastwood hasn't said much. I wonder what he's thinking." Behind the stage, Gail spoke quickly into her headset. "Stay with this, don't cut away. Keep camera 3 on Eastwood's face." De Niro looked directly at Eastwood now. "Some of our colleagues support ideas that hurt ordinary people. They play tough guys in movies but then help the rich get richer. They hide behind empty words like freedom, when what they really want is to turn back the clock." Everyone knew he was talking about Eastwood. The room felt hot and tense. Some audience members looked at their feet, embarrassed by the direct attack. Diane Kelly tried again to change the subject. "Let's talk about your upcoming projects." "No, this is important," De Niro interrupted. "People need to hear this. When famous people support harmful policies, it matters. It affects real lives." He continued talking, his voice getting louder. His face turned slightly red. He used his hands to make his point stronger. He never named Eastwood directly, but everyone knew who he meant. And through it all, Clint Eastwood sat still. He didn't look angry. He didn't try to interrupt. He just watched and listened, his famous squint getting perhaps a bit tighter. His hands remained relaxed on the chair arms. The cameras caught everything, De Niro's growing intensity and Eastwood's calm stillness. It was like watching two different acting styles clash in real time. And the audience, the crew, and millions of viewers at home all wondered the same thing. What would Clint Eastwood say when he finally got the chance to speak? De Niro finally stopped talking. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. Everyone looked at Clint Eastwood. Even the camera people who usually stayed professional turned their heads to watch him. Diane Kelly cleared her throat. She felt sweat on her forehead despite the cool studio. This was not how she had planned the interview. She had wanted friendly stories about old movies. Instead, she had a one-sided political argument on her hands. "Mr. Eastwood," she said carefully. Would you like to respond? Eastwood looked at her, then at De Niro. His blue eyes were calm. He didn't rush to speak. This was his way, in movies and in real life. He took his time. De Niro shifted in his seat. He had said what he wanted to say. He had made his points clear. Now he waited for Eastwood to fight back. In the control room, Gail Watson held her breath. Keep the shot wide, she said to her team. I want to see both of them. After what felt like a very long time, Eastwood spoke. His voice was low and steady, like gravel wrapped in velvet. You know, Robert, he said, in all my years, I've learned that when a man is secure in his beliefs, he doesn't need to shout them at others. That was all. Just one sentence. But it changed everything. De Niro's face showed surprise, then something else, maybe respect. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. The audience sat frozen for 3 seconds. Then they started to clap. Some people stood up. The clapping grew louder. Diane Kelly smiled with relief. This could have gone much worse. Well said, she managed to say when the clapping died down. Let's talk about your directing careers. Both of you have moved from acting to directing with great success, but the mood had changed. De Niro now looked thoughtful rather than angry. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Directing is harder than acting, he said. As an actor, you worry about one part. As a director, you worry about everything. Eastwood nodded. True. What's your approach to directing, Clint? Diane asked, happy to be back on safer ground. Hire good people. Start on time. Finish on time. Know what you want. Don't waste film. Eastwood's answers were still short, but the audience hung on every word. De Niro smiled a little. Clint is famous for doing just 1 or 2 takes. I sometimes do 20 or 30. Different ways to climb the mountain, Eastwood said with a small shrug. The tension from earlier had not completely gone, but it had changed into something more interesting. The two men were different in almost every way. How they talked, how they dressed, how they thought about politics, how they made movies. But they were both masters of their craft. In the audience, Susan Jones whispered to her husband Bill, Did you see how he turned it around with just 1 sentence? Bill nodded. Classic Eastwood. Behind the stage, Peter Brown watched on a small screen. He turned to another crew member. That's going to be everywhere tomorrow. The show continued. Diane asked about favorite roles. Playing Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull, De Niro said. I gained 60 pounds for that role. I wanted to know how it felt to be that heavy, to move that way. What about you, Clint? Diane asked. Unforgiven, maybe. William Money was a man facing his past. We all do that as we get older. As they talked about movies, something unexpected happened. De Niro and Eastwood began to find common ground. They both loved westerns. They both respected directors who worked quickly. They both disliked how new movies use too many special effects. The story gets lost, De Niro said. Exactly, Eastwood agreed. In the control room, Gail spoke into her headset. This is gold. We're going to run long. Tell the next show we need an extra 15 minutes. Halfway through the show, Diane asked about working with young actors. They know everything, De Niro said with a laugh. Until they realize they don't. Then they can learn. Most come ready to work, Eastwood added. Just need direction, like horses. De Niro looked surprised, then laughed again, more genuinely. This time. Did you just compare actors to horses? Eastwood gave a rare smile. Both can be stubborn. Both perform better with good treatment. The audience laughed. The atmosphere in the studio had completely changed. What had started as a tense political standoff had somehow become a masterclass in filmmaking. Diane Kelly felt herself relax for the first time since the show began. Tell us about your first big breaks in Hollywood, she said, as De Niro told. The story of his early days in New York. Eastwood listened with what seemed like real interest. When his turn came, he told a story about working on the TV show Rawhide that made everyone laugh. Fell off my horse on the first day, he admitted. The director said the cowboys don't fall off horses in the show. I said this one just did. Even De Niro laughed at that. The camera caught him shaking his head with a smile. In the audience, people who had come expecting to see a fight were getting something better. A real conversation between two very different men who had both reached the top of their field. Behind the scenes, Gail Watson was already thinking about how to promote the show. "The line that changed everything. That's our tagline," she said to Peter. As the hour drew to a close, Diane asked her final question. "What advice would you give to someone just starting in film today?" De Niro thought for a moment. "Learn your craft, really learn it, and be prepared to work harder than everyone else." Eastwood nodded. "And know when to keep quiet." De Niro looked at him, then gave a small laugh. "I'm still working on that one." It was a perfect ending. The audience stood up and clapped. Two actors shook hands, and this time it seemed more genuine. The cameras caught the moment when De Niro leaned in and said something to Eastwood that made the older man nod. No one could hear what was said. But later, crew members would claim that De Niro had said, "You got me," fair and square. As the two men walked off stage, Diane Kelly turned to the camera. That was Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro on American Icons, a conversation we'll be talking about for a long time to come. Good night, America. The red lights on the cameras went off. The show was over. But its impact was just beginning. Backstage, De Niro stopped Eastwood before they went to their dressing rooms. "That was quite a line," De Niro said. "Just the truth," Eastwood replied. "Still," De Niro said, "it made me think. Maybe I do talk too much sometimes." Eastwood didn't agree or disagree. He just gave a small nod. "There's a good Italian place not far from here," De Niro said after a moment. "If you're not busy later." Eastwood looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something rare. He smiled again. "Italian sounds good." As they walked to their separate dressing rooms, the crew watched in amazement. Something important had happened on that stage. Something that went beyond politics or movies. Two men had found respect for each other despite their differences, and it had all started with one perfect line. The next morning, videos of Eastwood's one line to De Niro spread across the internet like wildfire. People shared the clip on every social media site. News shows played it over and over. Radio hosts talked about it for hours. The line, "You know, Robert, in all my years I've learned that when a man is secure in his beliefs, he doesn't need to shout them at others," became famous overnight. In her apartment in New York, Gail Watson watched the online numbers grow with amazement. She had produced TV shows for 30 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The clip had 10 million views already, and it was still early morning. Her phone rang. It was Peter Brown, her assistant. "Are you seeing this?" he asked without saying hello. "Yes," Gail said. "It's incredible. The network president just called. He wants to air the whole show again tonight in prime time." Gail smiled. This would be good for her career. "Tell him yes, and tell him we should make a special version with extra behind-the-scenes footage." After hanging up, Gail checked her email. She had messages from 20 reporters who wanted to talk about the show. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Was the moment real, or was it planned? Gail knew the truth. It was completely real. That's why people couldn't stop watching it. In a world where so much was fake or scripted, Eastwood's honest reaction felt like fresh air. Meanwhile, in a hotel room in Los Angeles, Robert De Niro sat drinking coffee and reading the online comments about the show. He was surprised by how fast everything had spread. He was even more surprised by what people were saying. He had expected people to take sides, to agree with him or with Eastwood. But most comments weren't about who was right. They were about how Eastwood had responded. "Pure class," one comment said. "That's how you win an argument without arguing," said another. De Niro put down his phone and looked out the window at the city. He had been angry on that stage. He had wanted to make Eastwood look bad. Instead, Eastwood had made him think. His phone rang. It was his agent, Frank Miller. "Good morning, Robert," Frank said. "Have you seen the news?" "Some of it," De Niro replied. "Well, I have calls from 3 directors who want to meet with you, and 2 of them want both you and Eastwood for their next projects." De Niro raised his eyebrows. Both of us? Together? Yes. They saw your chemistry on that show. They think you two would be amazing in a movie together. De Niro thought about this. He and Eastwood had never worked together before. Their styles were so different. But maybe that was the point. Maybe those differences could create something interesting. What kind of movies? He asked. One is about two retired detectives who have to work together to solve a cold case. The other is about political rivals who get stuck in an elevator during a blackout. De Niro laughed. The second one sounded too much like what had just happened in real life. I'll think about it, he said. Across town in his simple house in the hills, Clint Eastwood was not watching the news or checking social media. He was in his garden drinking coffee and reading a book. His phone was turned off. His daughter, Kathy, arrived around 10 o'clock. She walked into the garden with a big smile. Dad, have you seen what's happening online? She asked. Eastwood looked up from his book. No. Your line to De Niro is everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. Eastwood just nodded and sipped his coffee. Kathy sat down next to him. Aren't you excited? This is huge. It was just a conversation, Eastwood said. Just told the truth as I see it. Kathy shook her head, smiling. Her father had always been this way. Success or failure, praise or criticism. None of it changed how he lived his life. Well, I think it was amazing, she said. Oh, and Mom called. She saw it too. She said it reminded her of how you used to handle arguments with her. Quiet, but effective. Eastwood allowed himself a small smile at that. Back at the TV studio, Diane Kelly was meeting with her team to discuss the success of the show. They sat around a large table looking at viewing numbers and social media reports. We need to follow up on this, said Greg Harris, the network executive. He was a young man in an expensive suit who talked very fast. Maybe get them back for another show? A special? Diane shook her head. I don't think that would work. What happened was special because it was natural. If we try to make it happen again, it won't be the same. Then what about a show about famous Hollywood moments? We could use this as the centerpiece, Greg suggested. While they talked, Diane's assistant came in with a note. Diane read it and looked surprised. What is it? Greg asked. De Niro and Eastwood were seen having dinner together last night at Giovanni's restaurant. They stayed for 3 hours. Everyone at the table looked shocked. Are you serious? Greg asked. The two of them had dinner? Together? After what happened? Diane nodded. According to this, they were talking and laughing like old friends. The room buzzed with this news. No one had expected this development. Meanwhile, at a small Italian restaurant called Giovanni's, the owner, Angelo Rossi, was telling everyone about his famous guests from the night before. They sat in the back corner, Angelo told a regular customer. Mr. De Niro ordered the spaghetti. He comes here sometimes, but Mr. Eastwood never seen him before. He had the chicken piccata. Did they talk about what happened on TV? The customer asked. Angelo shrugged. At first, yes. I heard Mr. De Niro say something about the show. But then they started talking about old movies, directors they knew. They laughed a lot. Really? They laughed? Yes. Mr. Eastwood, he doesn't look like a man who laughs much, but he did last night. And Mr. De Niro told a story about some movie he made in the 70s that made them both laugh so hard I had to bring more wine. The truth was, the dinner had started awkwardly. The two men had ordered drinks and looked at menus in silence for several minutes. Then De Niro had brought up the show. That line of yours, he said. It hit home. Eastwood just nodded. I do get worked up sometimes, De Niro admitted. Passionate about things. Nothing wrong with passion, Eastwood said. Just different ways to show it. That simple exchange had somehow broken the ice. They started talking about their first films, about directors who had taught them important lessons. They found they both loved jazz music. They both enjoyed fishing. They both hated doing publicity for movies. By the time dessert came, they were telling stories and laughing like old friends who had just been out of touch for a while. When they left the restaurant, several people recognized them and looked surprised to see them together. One woman asked if she could take a picture. They agreed, standing side by side, neither smiling much but both looking comfortable. That picture would appear in newspapers the next day with headlines like Hollywood Peace Treaty and From Rivals to Friends in One Night. And all across America, people who had watched the show and seen the famous line would be amazed at this unexpected ending to the story. No one had expected Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro to become friends. But sometimes, the most powerful words are the ones that build bridges instead of walls. 1 week after the famous TV show, Robert De Niro sat in his agent's office in downtown Los Angeles. The office was on the top floor of a tall building with glass walls that showed the whole city. Frank Miller, his agent for 20 years, spread several movie scripts on the desk between them. "These all came in this week," Frank said. "Everyone wants you now. That show made you more popular than ever." De Niro picked up one of the scripts and looked at the title, Old Rivals. He raised an eyebrow at Frank. "Yes, that one is exactly what you think," Frank said with a smile. "It's about two old actors who hate each other but have to work together. They want you and Eastwood." "Of course they do," De Niro said, but he was smiling too. "Have they sent it to him?" "Yes. His agent says he's reading it right now." De Niro nodded and looked out at the city. In the week since the show, his life had changed in strange ways. People stopped him on the street to talk about Eastwood's line. Some asked if he was angry about it. Others praised him for how he handled it. A few even asked if he and Eastwood were really friends now. The truth was, De Niro wasn't sure what they were. They had that one dinner. They had talked on the phone twice since then. Eastwood had even sent him a book about the history of jazz that they had discussed at dinner. It wasn't exactly friendship yet, but it was something new and unexpected. "What do you think?" Frank asked, pointing at the scripts. "I'll read them," De Niro said. "But I'm not doing anything that just copies what happened on TV. That would be cheap." Frank nodded. "I agree, but some of these are good stories that would work well with you two." De Niro gathered the scripts to take home. As he was leaving, Frank said, "Oh, one more thing. Diane Kelly wants you on her show again next month. She's doing a special on actors who direct." De Niro stopped at the door. "Will Eastwood be there?" "They've invited him. No answer yet." "Let me know if he says yes," De Niro said. Across town, Clint Eastwood sat in a small dark room watching rough cuts of his new movie. He was in the editing stage, the part of filmmaking he enjoyed most. Just him and the editor, making thousands of small choices that would shape the final film. The editor, a young woman named Linda Green, stopped the film. "That's all we have so far," she said. "What do you think?" "Looking good," Eastwood said. "Cut the scene with the dog. Too long." Linda made a note. "Will do. Oh, and your agent called again. He really wants you to look at those new scripts." Eastwood made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Ever since the TV show with De Niro, his agent had been calling constantly with new offers. Apparently, being calm on television made people want to give you movie roles. "I'll get to them," he said. He specifically mentioned one called Winter. "Partners." Said De Niro is interested in that one. Eastwood looked at her. "Is that so?" "That's what he said." Eastwood thought about this. He had enjoyed his dinner with De Niro more than he expected to. The man was different in private, still intense, still passionate, but also thoughtful and funny. They had talked about old movies for hours. "I'll read that one first," he decided. Later that day, at a popular lunch spot in Beverly Hills, Diane, Kelly met with Gail Watson to discuss their next big show. They sat at an outdoor table, both wearing sunglasses to avoid being recognized. "The network wants another moment like the Eastwood-De Niro one," Gail said. "They keep asking if we can recreate that magic." Diane shook her head. "Lightning doesn't strike twice. That happened because it was real." "I know," Gail agreed. "But the ratings were the highest we've ever had. And the online numbers are still growing. People are using Eastwood's line in all sorts of situations now." This was true. In the past week, politicians had quoted the line in debates. Teachers used it in classrooms. It had become a meme, with people adding the quote to pictures of Eastwood from his movies. Someone had even printed it on t-shirts. "I invited them both back for the director's special," Diane said. De Niro seems interested. No word from Eastwood yet. He'll come, Gail said. Those two have something now, a connection. At that moment, Diane's phone buzzed. She looked at it and smiled. What? Gail asked. Eastwood's people just confirmed. He'll do the director's show. Gail grinned and raised her water glass. Here's to lightning striking twice. Meanwhile, in a recording studio in Nashville, a young country singer named Bobby Lee was recording a new song. He had written it just days after watching the famous TV moment. The song was called No Need to Shout and used Eastwood's line in the chorus. Bobby had sent a demo to his manager as a joke, not expecting anything. But the manager had called back immediately, saying they needed to record it right away. This could be your big break, the manager had said. Everyone's talking about that line. Your song could ride that wave. So now Bobby stood in the studio singing about being secure in your beliefs and not needing to shout them. The producer, an older man named Jeff Lane, nodded along. That's the one, Jeff said when they finished. That's the take we'll use. Bobby took off his headphones. Do you really think people will like it? Kid, this song is going to be everywhere in 2 weeks. Trust me. Back in New York in a small apartment, a teacher named Mary Clark was showing the famous TV clip to her high school debate class. The students watched on a large screen as Eastwood delivered his now famous line to De Niro. When it finished, Mary turned to her students. So what can we learn from this about effective communication? A girl in the front row raised her hand. That being calm is more powerful than being loud? Good, Mary said. What else? A boy near the window spoke up. That the way you say something matters as much as what you say. Mary nodded. Excellent. Eastwood used what we call quiet authority. He didn't need to raise his voice because his words were strong enough on their own. The students wrote notes. Many of them had already seen the clip online. Some had shown it to their parents. A few had even used Eastwood's approach in arguments with siblings, with surprising success. For next week, Mary said, I want you to write a short speech using the principles we saw in this clip. Be clear, be calm, and make your point without shouting. As all this happened across America, Clint Eastwood sat in his living room reading the script called Winter Partners. It was about two former police officers who had never gotten along but were forced to work together one last time on a difficult case. The script was good, the dialogue was sharp, the story had heart. It wasn't just trying to copy what had happened on TV. Eastwood's phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert De Niro. Eastwood answered. Hello, Robert. Clint, De Niro said. Did you read it? Just finishing it now. What do you think? Eastwood was quiet for a moment. It's good. Real good. I think so too, De Niro said. It's not trying to cash in on what happened. It's its own story. Agreed. There was a pause. Then De Niro asked, So, are you interested? Eastwood looked out his window at the hills behind his house. At his age, he was careful about which projects he took on. He didn't have time to waste on movies that didn't matter. But this one felt right. And working with De Niro would be interesting. Their different styles might create something special. Yes, Eastwood said. I'm interested. On the other end of the line, De Niro smiled. Good. That's good. I'll tell Frank to work out the details with your people. Sounds right. Another pause. Then De Niro said, Are you doing Diane's director's show next month? Said I would. Me too, De Niro said. Should be interesting. Yep. They both knew that everyone would be watching, hoping for another big moment between them. But that wasn't how lightning worked. You couldn't plan it or force it. It just happened when the conditions were right. See you then, De Niro said. Looking forward to it, Eastwood replied. As he hung up the phone, Eastwood smiled to himself. From enemies to co-stars in just 2 weeks. Life was full of surprises, even at his age, and it had all started with one line on live TV. 1 month later, the American Icons Director's Special was about to begin. The same studio was filled with an even larger audience. People had been waiting outside since early morning to get seats. Everyone wanted to see Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro together again. Backstage, Diane Kelly checked her notes one last time. The network had given special instructions. Try to get another magical moment between the two actors. But Diane knew better. You couldn't force lightning to strike. All she could do was ask good questions and let the conversation flow naturally. In their separate dressing rooms, Eastwood and De Niro prepared for the show. Unlike last time, there was no tension in the air. Both men knew what to expect. Both were relaxed. De Niro's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his son, Tony. "Good luck tonight, Dad. Try not to get crushed again. Just kidding. Love you." De Niro smiled. His family had teased him gently about what happened last time, but they were also proud of how he had handled it. It takes a big man to admit when someone else makes a good point. In his dressing room, Eastwood sat quietly as the makeup artist worked. He didn't check his phone or review any notes. He just sat still, conserving his energy. At his age, he had learned to save his strength for when it mattered. There was a knock at his door. When the makeup artist opened it, Robert De Niro stood there. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" De Niro asked. Eastwood nodded and De Niro entered the room. The makeup artist finished quickly and left them alone. "I wanted to tell you something. Before we go out there," De Niro said, sitting in a chair near Eastwood. "The movie deal is final. We start filming Winter Partners in 3 months. Good news," Eastwood said. "It is," De Niro agreed. "But that's not why I came in. I wanted to thank you." Eastwood raised an eyebrow, waiting for more. "That line of yours on the last show," De Niro continued. "It made me think about how I express myself. About how I come across to others. I've been doing some reflecting." Eastwood nodded slowly. "We all need that sometimes." "Anyway," De Niro said, standing up, "I just wanted you to know that before we go out there. Tonight will be different." As De Niro reached the door, Eastwood spoke. "Robert." De Niro turned. "I've been thinking too," Eastwood said. "Maybe I could talk a bit more. Meet you halfway." De Niro smiled. "I'd like that." 10 minutes later, the show began. The lights came up, the music played, and Diane Kelly welcomed the audience. "Good evening, America. Tonight we have the return of 2 legendary actors who are also accomplished directors. Please welcome back Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro." The Bucker audience stood and cheered as the 2 men walked onto the stage. This time they walked out together side by side. They waved to the crowd and sat down in their chairs, looking comfortable and at ease. In the control room, Gail Watson watched, carefully. "Something's different," she said to Peter Brown. "Look at their body language." It was true. Last time the 2 men had sat stiffly, barely looking at each other. Now they seemed relaxed, turned slightly toward each other as if ready to have a real conversation. Diane started with a question about directing styles. "How does your approach to acting influence the way you direct other actors?" De Niro went first. "I try to give actors the freedom I want when I'm acting. Room to find the character, to try different approaches." He paused, then added with a smile, "But I'm learning that sometimes less is more." Eastwood nodded. "Every actor is different. Some need lots of direction. Others just need the space to work. The trick is knowing which is which." He looked at De Niro. "And sometimes the quiet ones have the most to say." The audience watched, fascinated by the change in both men. De Niro was more measured, less intense. Eastwood was more forthcoming, less reserved. They had each moved toward the middle. As the show continued, the 2 men shared stories about difficult movies they had directed. They talked about working with famous actors. They discussed how filmmaking had changed over their long careers. "CGI has its place," De Niro said. "But nothing beats real human emotion on screen." "Agreed," Eastwood said. "Technology should serve the story, not the other way around." In the audience, a woman named Helen Davis whispered to her friend, "They're like old friends now. It's amazing. What a difference a month makes." Her friend nodded. "Or one perfect line at the right moment." Halfway through the show, Diane brought up the news that everyone had been talking about. "So, I understand you 2 will be working together on a film called Winter Partners. Can you tell us about that?" De Niro looked at Eastwood, silently asking who should answer. Eastwood gave a small nod, indicating De Niro should go ahead. It's a story about two former police officers, De Niro explained. They worked together years ago but never got along. Now they're brought back for one last case. It's about second chances, about how people can change. And what made you both want to do this project? Diane asked. Eastwood spoke this time. Good script, good story, and good timing. De Niro smiled at that last part. Yes, the timing felt right. Sometimes life puts you in a position to see things differently, to try something new. Everyone in the audience knew they weren't just talking about the movie. They were talking about their own unexpected journey from rivals to colleagues, to something like friends. In the control room, Gail Watson smiled. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation of the first show. It was something better, a story of growth and change. This is gold, she said to Peter. Different kind of gold, but still gold. As the show neared its end, Diane asked her final question. Last time you were here, something unexpected happened that people are still talking about. Looking back now, what do you think about that moment? De Niro and Eastwood exchanged a look. Then De Niro spoke. That moment changed things for me, he said honestly. Clint said something I needed to hear, even if I didn't know it at the time. Sometimes the right words at the right moment can make a big difference. Eastwood nodded. And sometimes, he added, the people we disagree with the most are the ones we can learn the most from. The audience applauded. It wasn't a viral, dramatic moment like last time. It was something deeper. Two men showing how people with different views could find common ground and mutual respect. As they left the stage after the show, a reporter asked if they would do more projects together after Winter Partners. 1 step at a time, Eastwood said. But we're open to it, De Niro added. Very open to it. 6 months later, on a movie set in Montana, Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro stood together watching a playback of a scene they had just filmed for Winter Partners. In the scene, their characters finally put aside their old grudges and shake hands. Good take, the director said. But can we try one more? I feel like there's something else there, something deeper between these characters. De Niro looked at
Eastwood. What do you think? One more. Eastwood considered for a moment, then gave a small smile. Why not? Sometimes the best moments come when you least expect them.
De Niro nodded, understanding that Eastwood wasn't just talking about the movie. And as they walked back to their marks to film the scene again, both men knew that what had started with one perfect line on live television had led to something neither of them could have predicted. A partnership based on mutual respect and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a real friendship. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones that build bridges instead of walls. And sometimes, those bridges lead to places you never expected to go.